Well, first of all, thank you very much for coming along to this stand-up. I'm proud today to announce on behalf of ACT that our government now has a need not race cabinet circular, a central direction to all government departments to use only the best statistical analysis of which people are most in need of social services. We've seen as recently as last week in Hawke's Bay, government departments using just one statistical indicator, a person's ethnic background, to decide how to allocate public services. This government is committed to a social investment model and sound use of data in all it does in order that we make sure the people who really have the greatest need are those that are getting the help. Now, there are many people who might have a Māori or Pacific ethnic background. For example, I myself could claim that, but don't have high health needs. Similarly, there are people who do not have a Māori or Pacific ethnic background who do have high health need. And it's important that rather than defaulting to ethnicity as a decider of which services are allocated, how and when, that we dig into the true causes of inequity and truly help those in the greatest need. Not only does better statistical analysis mean that we can do a better job of understanding where the need is, we can actually get stuck into solving the problems. For example, it's often stated that there's a difference in life expectancy for Māori and non-Māori. That is absolutely true. But the question is, why is that the first lens that you use? There's many other interesting and useful statistics, such as the quality of housing, living in urban versus rural, having high or low incomes, and perhaps having some lifestyle choices that affect your health and your longevity. Those should also be taken into account so that we can help all the people, not just those on the basis of ethnicity. Furthermore, apart from getting better statistics, better targeting, more practical problem solving, it's also much less divisive to deliver services on the basis of need not race. I'm really proud that we're doing this as a government. It's a step towards the kind of country that New Zealand can and should be, one that has many different cultures, people from many different backgrounds, and a will to make sure that opportunity is equal in all of those backgrounds are celebrated equally. At the same time, this circular ends the position on procurement, where a portion of government procurement was supposed to be done from quote-unquote Māori businesses. In our view, this has led to perversities where companies have been able to claim based on ancestry of their ownership that they're somehow better at providing services to government, yet in reality what we want is for each and every person to flourish in their own way rather than introducing arbitrary differentiation based on who a person's ancestors were. There will no doubt be other things that people may wish to ask about. I note the issue with allegations of teachers taking healthy school lunches from children. All I can say is that we've asked the Ministry of Education to look into that. I think most New Zealanders will be very clear that one of the jobs of teachers is to instill good values in children, show children the difference between right and wrong, and it's very hard for teachers to do that when the teacher themselves is allegedly nicking their lunch and also repressing their ability to seek justice by calling for help when bad things like that happen. So it's certainly something the Ministry of Education will be looking into, and I look forward in the near future to announcing more details about how the Healthy School Lunch program will continue. I think it's going to be better and cost less, but it's going to be done for primarily the benefit of the students, not to have it nicked by someone else before it gets to them. I'm happy to take questions on any other issue too.
So David, just on the circular, how do you assess need?
There's quite a variety of different statistical indicators that can be used, and the circular requires that all of the different indicators that a person has can be analysed. So, for example, if we believe that there's a problem with rheumatic fever, as we saw an excellent interview from Jason Gurney on Q&A on Sunday in his forthcoming, or I think his book's out now, it came out on Wednesday, it might actually be that people who are suffering from poor housing are the people with the greatest need. It might be that people in rural areas are the ones that are having the greatest challenges around a particular health condition. So all the circular requires is for a government department to look at all of the characteristics of a person, not just say one race, another race, because that's divisive and lazy.
But if you have more Māori GPs, for example, you have funding to assist those Māori GPs into university training schemes, the evidence shows that Māori patients are more likely to be inclined to visit those professionals. So isn't this kind of taking things backwards?
Well, again, the thing about that evidence is that if you start with the assumption that we're going to look at everything through the lens of their ethnic background, then yes, you can find correlations. The point of the circular is that you have to look for what are some of the other characteristics that might be important behind that too. And if you find that you've evaluated all of the different possibilities and the one variable that still differentiates people is their ethnicity, that's fine. All the circular does is says we need to look at the whole person and all of their characteristics before jumping to the conclusion that we group people by race.
The Association of Salaried Medical Specialists has called this directive reductive and says it ignores evidence. How do you respond to that?
Well, it can't actually be true because there's no evidence that is required to be ignored. The circular requires government departments allocating government services to look at all the markers, all of the characteristics of the whole person. So if anything, it's a call for more evidence. Very difficult to call that an ignoring of evidence.
David, on those university admissions, does this mean that universities will have to scrap their Māori and Pacific admissions schemes?
No, but it means that what government departments, including universities which are funded by the taxpayer, would be expected to do is actually demonstrate that there is value. So we've just had a question making the claim that the MAPAS scheme at the University of Auckland, that the whole of society or mirror of society scheme at Otago have done a number of things. Number one, got more doctors trained. Number two, got them to see more Pacifica and Māori patients. And number three, improve their health outcomes by doing so. Now, the government has a separate policy to do an evaluation of just that. And if it is true, all three of those things are true, more Māori and Pacific doctors, more Māori and Pacific patients seen by them that wouldn't otherwise be, and better outcomes than they'd otherwise be, then that's absolutely fine. You know, that's going by the evidence and doing what works. If you can't show that, then I think you've got to challenge whether or not it's right to discriminate on someone's ethnicity, because the starting point should always be no racial discrimination. We abhor it, we want it gone. It's only when you can show clear evidence that it's acceptable, and that's what the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, which is quoted in the circular and to which New Zealand is a signatory, requires us to do.
What would you say to people that say the circular is just another example of the government attacking Māori?
What I'd say to those people is that actually this is a country based on equal rights for each and every citizen, no matter what your background. Now, if people want to frame that as attacking Māori, what they're really saying is that Māori are somehow different and won't succeed in a world where you start with equal rights. It may be that they're ignoring another possibility, that we need to do far better in public services, but you can actually do that without having to be discriminatory. So, for example, I am a strong supporter of kura horua or charter schools. I'm thrilled we've had 80 applications to do it. Many of them are iwi or Māori based. That is a hugely positive thing. But equally, we're letting anybody run a charter school if they can prove they can get the results. We're not saying, as some would, that there should be a separate Ministry of Education and divide the country in two.
But there's plenty of evidence that Māori have worse health outcomes. Like the bowel screening, for example, Māori should be screened 10 years earlier than Pākehā because of the risk factors. So is that directive going to change that policy?
Well, it depends, because you might find that that's not true for all Māori, and it might be not true for only Māori.
How are you going to work out if it's true or not? And how long will that take and how much money will that cost?
Well, the requirement is for government departments, when they do this sort of targeting, to ask the question, are there other reasons why some people have more trouble with bowel cancer than others? And if they can show that the only indicator that's there is ethnicity, then that's fine. But you go and look at that Jason Gurney interview on the weekend. He made it very clear, rheumatic fever is a big problem for Māori, but it's not genetic. It's caused by access to housing. It's caused by poverty. As he said, all of the social determinants of poverty. But those social determinants of poverty don't just apply to Māori people. They might, on average, apply to more Māori people. But what I'm challenging is that you say these statistics, and the statistics you say are true. My question is, why do you start with an ethnic lens as your starting point to form those statistics?
Well, I think that's the starting point because that's what the facts show. guess my question is...
Well, yeah, but the challenge is that it's a circular argument, right? So they start with the assumption that we're going to group people in ethnic groups. I think that is a wrong assumption. It's a divisive assumption. It doesn't get you to the core of the issue, and it doesn't show you practical ways of solving the problem.
Can you give some examples of services delivered based on race, not need outside of health?
Look, I think it's fair to say that health is the primary area where this is true. Education might be one too, but for the most part it's health where this has been the case.
David, your coalition agreement states that this should have been done in the first 6 months of government. Why is it taking so long?
Because it's more important to get it right than get a particular deadline. This is quite a technical and challenging thing to do, and I think, as you can see even in this discussion, this is not in any denial that on average, particularly Māori but also Pacific, have worse social statistics in some areas, but it is saying we need to challenge ourselves to look deeper into the data and understand what the causes of those differences are, and are there other causes that we can target that will actually get us to solve the problem faster and in a way that's fairer and less divisive.
It's still taken way longer than you wanted to initially. Did you have to hurry National along at all?
No, it's been a really collegial effort, and we said, look, this is a bit more complex than we thought, and they said, okay, we've got to get it done in 6 months, and I said, you know what? I don't mind if we take longer, and we carried on that basis. So I'm sorry to disappoint you, but it's just an example of us working well together.
Audrey Young from New Zealand Care Treaty Tech Leader said your behaviour this week attacking Justice Ministry officials over their treaty advice to you was appalling. Were you out of line? How do you see it?
No, I mean, Audrey's entitled to her view. She's been writing for long enough, but she needs to explain how you're supposed to respond when a group of people who have dominated the debate for a long time are not open to a different way of looking at it. The fact is they disagree with the direction of the Treaty Principles Bill, but the Treaty Principles Bill is in place because we disagree with the way the public service has been interpreting the treaty for the last 30 years. So there's a natural conflict there. I think occasionally, Audrey gets on a little bit of a high horse, but hey, I still like her, I still respect her as a journo.
Has the Prime Minister met with you at all to discuss the possibility of not putting this bill through, ditching this bill?
No.
Has he raised any concerns with you about it?
It's one thing that's been totally clear all the way through is that we're all keeping our coalition commitments.
So the Prime Minister supports this?
Beg your pardon?
The Prime Minister supports this?
Oh, sorry, are we talking about the circular or the bill?
I'm talking about the Treaty Principles.
Yeah, so I was answering on that basis, and that's absolutely the case. The answer is no. All three parties are heavily committed to seeing through their coalition commitments to the letter, and we are. And your question was different.
So have you talked to the Prime Minister about the circular? Does he support what you've talked about in the circular?
Well, absolutely. This is a policy that's been through Cabinet. It's agreed to by all ministers, including the Prime Minister.
On the life expectancy rates, you say the public service can't simply assume Māori have shorter life expectancy just because we're Māori. They're not assuming that that it's from Statistics New Zealand's death rates. That's not just an assumption that they've made. They have come from Statistics New Zealand.
Well, I don't think anyone's disputing the fact that if you take the average Māori life expectancy and the average non-Māori life expectancy, there's about a 7-year gap. No one's disputing that. We know that. The challenge is it the best way to come at these differences to divide people by their ethnic background? You may find that there are other indicators. The obvious example is we know that poor housing leads to respiratory diseases. People that are Māori and people that are non-Māori suffer from that problem. The important thing about taking that observation is it allows us to actually do something about the problem, because what we've had, particularly in health over the past decade or so, is this idea that, well, it must be because people who work in the health system are somehow deficient or treat people badly. A lot of people in the healthcare system are quite offended by that proposition and actually bend over backwards to help all their patients as best they can. So it's not a question of disputing what Statistics New Zealand say, it's a question of do we believe that you should start framing up your statistical analysis with race as your first port of call? And the answer is no.
But we, during the COVID-19 pandemic with vaccination rollouts and things like that, we knew that there were certain communities that were harder to get into and harder to access and build that relationship with. Do you not think that this will make that harder if we're now not kind of, being specific about this?
All we're doing is requiring more robust statistical analysis and following the International Convention on the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, which says we don't discriminate based on race. We only do it if there's a firm statistical case to do so, and we've exhausted all other avenues. I think that's an enlightened way to think, is to say, look, there's a whole person, they have many attributes, and we don't skip to one before others, especially when it's a particularly divisive one.
Is getting that more detailed statistical analysis going to delay care for anyone?
No, I shouldn't think so. Actually, right across the government.
Have we had an assurance of that? Because that's key, right? If they're drilling down into other statistics to try and work out if a person justifiably receives this or that, then it takes time.
Yeah.
It's scarce. So what assurance do we have at this moment?
Well, first of all, we're not saying that you have to stop doing anything right now until you've done the analysis. What we are saying is that in future, when government analyses its activities right across the board, and remember, this government is committed to a social investment approach. These things mesh together. We want to see more robust analysis. I mean, I'll give you an example that's actually not related to this. I'm responsible for school attendance. We have found that none of the initiatives put in place under the previous government, $47 million, could they actually point to the data showing whether they worked. So I went through and said, which of these should we continue? They said, we don't really know. We can't tell you, sorry. So I think having a commitment to better data and better analysis across government is actually a good thing. It's not going to delay anyone's care.
Just on the school lunch allegations, where did this happen? How extensive is this issue?
In one school south of Auckland, there's been quite acute allegations from a parent that lunches were being taken, children were coming home hungry. The parent tried to raise it. There's been some back and forth between the school and the parents. The children at one point tried to call the parents and tell the parents what was happening. They had their phone confiscated because they weren't allowed to have their phone. So there's been quite a fracas about this. We've asked the Ministry of Education to look into it, but we just want to be clear, because people are talking about it, that we don't think this is acceptable. Teacher's job is to teach right from wrong. Hard to do that when the teacher's the one nicking your lunch.
So is this a teacher allegedly taking the lunch of multiple students
over a period of time? Yes.
How long?
Well, over several weeks is the allegation.
Yeah. Like a term?
Not a term, no.
And taking it from how many students?
A handful, several who are in one family is the allegation.
Right, and they were upset about that, obviously.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, it's completely wrong. If something's provided for a purpose, then the person employed at the organisation should facilitate that purpose, not take it away.
On the school lunches, RNZ's been reporting today that the government was well aware there was really strong wellbeing benefits of the scheme well before you decided to trim its funding. Why would you cut the scheme if the government was aware of those wellbeing benefits?
Well, first of all, we actually have done pretty rigorous analysis of the Healthy School Lunch program. There's been 5 different studies by the Ministry of Education. The best they could find was, if I recall correctly, a 1.6% increase in attendance at schools where it was being served. So in terms of actually achieving educational outcomes, getting children to school and learning, which is what the education budget is legally allowed to be used for, it's been very hard to find significant improvements, almost none at all. Second of all, we're actually continuing the program. We're going to save over $100 million a year. We're going to extend it to low-income early childhood education students, some of the most vulnerable, and we're going, I believe, to make it better in the long term. So, I guess what you've got to confront here is we're actually improving it. So to the extent that it's a good thing, we're doing better at that, but we're also doing it for less money, which I think has got to be a positive.
So those wider wellbeing benefits, though, above and beyond school attendance, do those not matter in this school lunch programming?
Well, I think wellbeing's important. I also think that when we go to Parliament and appropriate money to use from the taxpayer, it has to be used for a purpose. And in this case, the purpose is education. In the long term, and this is to come, I think you're going to see a more serious shake-up of what the purpose of the school lunch program is, because at the moment we've got the Ministry of Health doing fruit in schools, we've got the Ministry of Social Development doing Kickstart Breakfast, we've got Kids Can on the charitable front, we've got Fonterra and Sanitarium in there as well. It's not really obvious, and don't forget that group called Parents. It's not really obvious which part of the government is delivering lunches to schools for which purpose. So I agree with you that there's some other questions to be asked, and we will ask them. But in the meantime, we're using education money to deliver things that have education outcomes as quickly and efficiently as possible.
On the circular, we've got existing stats around health, we've got an existing way of operating. You're saying we've got to find a new way of operating based on analysis of growth statistics.
Yeah.
What's your expectation in the gap, in between getting that analysis and where we currently are?
Well, you can only go as fast as you can go, but I expect that we'll start seeing more rigorous analysis of government programs and government targeting than we've previously seen, and that's right across the board. That's what social investment means. There's too many programs funded where we don't know who they're helping or how much, and I point to attendance again because that's an area I'm quite involved with. We're going to be a lot more rigorous at understanding which of the attendance service or other interventions we're paying for actually make a difference. All right. Well, one more question.
One more question, if I can. Are you confident the public sector is actually going to take heed of your circular, given it's just a circular and what we've seen with Oxford and Kingspan part of this?
Well, in fairness, the circular wasn't in place when they put that policy in place. And yes, actually, in New Zealand, we've got a very professional public service that we do expect to heed Cabinet circulars. Certainly when I talk to members of the public service here in New Zealand, you find that they're very committed to carrying out the will of the elected government. So, yeah, absolutely. When you say just a circular, with the greatest respect, it is actually an important thing in government, what circulars Cabinet issues.
Just last one on
Yeah, sure.
Principles bill. Do you at any stage, have you ever sort of thought, because you don't have the support to get across the line, that you should turn your attention to other priorities?
Well, the great thing is I can walk and chew gum, and we're setting up the Ministry of Regulation. We're dealing with regulations in early childhood and horticultural and agricultural imports. We've got 80-odd applicants starting charter schools. We're rolling out new policies on attendance. We've increased the Farm Act budget by about $2.4 billion. We're changing the way they do budget bids. I mean, no one's accusing me of not doing enough, right?
But the policy...
I haven't got on to finance yet.
No, but the policy's doing. So...
No, I don't think it is. I don't think it is. And I'll tell you why. When Michael Laws put up the first euthanasia bill in 1995, he knew that he didn't have a snowball's chance in hell. But he made it possible for Peter Brown's bill, which lost by only 2 votes, which made it possible for my bill, which won by 10 votes. Actually 20, it was 70-50. So, this is how these things tend to go. Once you make it legitimate for people to have a say on their founding document of their country, which for too long people have been told, if you're not an expert, if you don't have the right opinion, you get shouted down and told to shut up. Actually, we're introducing an idea that we all live in this country, we all have the consequences of our constitutional documents interpretation, and after 50 years of Parliament saying there were principles but being silent about it, that silence is being broken, and that is an incredibly important exercise.